know that. I'm talking about making the world a better place. The property rights of the lords were violated pretty substantially, mind you, in many European countries when we transitioned towards a democratic society. You know, when we had the vast swaths of land they controlled being broken up and made municipal properties that were then zoned off into commercial areas. That was their property being seized, and it made the world a much, much better place. And it had nothing to do, by the way, with the serfs being mad at how things turned out. It had to do with the fact that the system was fundamentally unfair, as then a very small number of people controlled all the political power and economic power in the country. We have today a system where a very small number of people control all the economic and political power. And it's interesting to me that in this discussion, which is ostensibly supposed to be about the benefits of worker co-ops or capitalism, whatever, you seem encamped with the very idea of fundamentally changing society, which is the most banal, boring, and spineless approach imaginable to discussing political theory. Go ahead.
Thanks, Vaush.
Yeah, okay. It's pretty bold of you, to be honest, to admit that you don't understand what I've just said and then claim that my argument is incoherent or nonsense when you've just admitted fault. The difference is in English, liberalism is individualistic and German socialism is collectivist. This means that in English individualism, the individual is his own property and his property rights matter. You are a German collectivist, so the individual is not their property. They are actually property of the group. Their property rights don't matter. If you can find a philosophical rationale to allow you to target a portion of the population to persecute them, which I would say violating people's right to property is a form of persecution, then you are in fact no different to the tyrants of the 20th century. The only difference between you and them is scale. The idea you can't compare feudal lords to Mark Zuckerberg. Like, Zuckerberg achieved his prosperity through consent. They achieved theirs through violence. We do not consider violence a legitimating factor, but we do consider consent a legitimating factor. If we don't agree on that, then that's fine, but I think you're wrong. And medieval life was so much more complicated than serfs versus lords. I don't even want to start going down that rabbit hole. It'll be a massive distraction, but you do not know enough about feudal Europe, basically.
That's a very compelling counter argument, Carl. I don't want to get into it, but you're wrong, Lowell. So I don't know. I've seen you try to do this before. You believe that sort of nations have a character and you try to fit people into those blocks. I don't know what you mean by German collectivism. I'm advocating for property rights. In fact, I'm advocating for the expansion of property rights. I don't know if you're actually engaging with any of the arguments that I'm making here, because it seems like every time I respond to a series of points you make, you back up another level and make a different series of points. But that's okay. If you want to concede sort of the idea that market socialism would improve society, and your only contention is that passing laws to make private firms collectively owned by their workers cedes too close to some esoteric idea of German collectivism for your tastes, that's totally okay. What I care about is making society better. I advocate for the expansion of property rights so they apply to everyone who works at a given place. I don't like the fact that our society is controlled by a very small number of people. And I don't like people who justify the fact that society is controlled by a very small number of people by calling those who have lost in this game sore losers. I like democracy. I don't know how you feel about democracy. I like the idea that people should be able to advocate for their own rights. I consider these to be very fundamental principles of liberalism as well. It is often said that socialism is a promise to fulfill the Enlightenment, whereas fascism is a rejection of Enlightenment principles, which is why socialists are themselves very concerned with fraternity, equality, brotherhood, liberty, and fascists are, of course, not. They don't like those things very much. I care very much about the principles of the Enlightenment. It's why I advocate for everything that I do, because I do want a democratic society that is fair, that gives everyone a voice, both in their government and in the place that they work. And if you have no empirical arguments against the validity of that form of organization and would instead rather back up to some suggestion that I'm violating the English principle of the organization and that actually this type of oligarchy is much better than the old type of oligarchy, then feel free to. That's your right.
You'll never encounter a civilization that doesn't have some kind of oligarchy. It's wishful thinking at its worst, in my opinion. The idea, an expansion of property rights by violating other people's property rights. You could quite easily term theft that. There's no reason why that couldn't be applied theft, because that's precisely what you're doing. And the reason that you're doing it is because of my feels. I don't like this. I don't like that. Well, okay. That's fine. You don't have to like it. It's okay if you don't understand the difference between individualism and collectivism, even though I've just explained it. It's okay if you don't understand. It's okay if you're not engaging with it. But if that's all you're going to say, then I think we'll have to just agree to disagree, and you can agree to be wrong.
Sure. Yeah, I'm okay with being wrong in the eyes of somebody who believes advocating for liberty, democracy, fairness, and equality is feels over reals. You haven't really mounted any substantive counter argument either to the efficaciousness of a worker co-ops-led society, nor, mind you, to the fundamental differences between the legitimacy of this oligarchy and the last. And I don't know why you've accused me of not understanding collectivism as a concept when I've explained to you that collectivism isn't even relevant to the property rights discussion that you enhanced, I guess, ignorant of the fact that I'm advocating for its expansion, but that's all right. I know that you're somewhat averse to reading. This is something you would have to educate yourself on a little bit more before continuing the discussion. Would you like to talk about immigration? I had a lot of fun researching this subject since our last discussion, and I was pleased to find
I'd like to respond to what you've said there, because you don't.
Oh, feel free. Then we can talk about immigration.
You're not right on anything.
I'm trying to remember. I think it was Vaush who maybe got the ball rolling. So what we could do is give Sargon a chance to respond.
Hang on. I'd like to respond to that.
That's what I'm saying.
This is ridiculous.
I was going to say, if it's okay with you guys, I want to give you a chance to respond, Sargon, right now, and then if after that, if you guys are okay with immigration, I think it's a great segue.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks so much.
Right. So, Vaush, you literally kept saying the reason that you want what you want is because you'd like to see X, you'd like to see Y, and you believe that this is a way to see X and Y. That was your rationale. You can go back and watch the video and listen to yourself saying, I'd like this, I'd like that, right? The idea that you think collectivism and individualism is not a relevant distinction here is ridiculous. There is no such thing as expanding property rights. You can't do it. It's universal. It's inherent in each person by the labor that they spend to pick up like an acorn off the floor. That acorn is now my property because of the labor I expended to pick it up. Every person is imbued with property rights because of their ability to create property through their labor. You can't expand property rights. They are universal. This is what I mean when I say you're a collectivist, because what I've said there is an individualist perspective. Each individual has these rights. You don't agree with that. You think that they can expand and contract based on the state, which is what makes you a collectivist. This is why all I can say is we'll have to go on to the next topic, because there's no concord here. We can't.
No, I'm fine with that. We can move on. I'm glad you agree that people are entitled to the fruits of their labor, Carl.
Yeah, but you don't.
Okay, so this is a perfect
you're
segue.
literally arguing to take away the fruits of people's labor.